The sun rose cold and clear over Washington, D.C., painting the city's marble monuments with a pale golden light. But inside the Rayburn building, on the second floor, history waited to be rewritten. Room 2154, usually just another chamber for routine government business, now buzzed with electricity, the kind of energy that only comes when something big is about to happen. Reporters lined the walls, notebooks in hand, their faces tight with anticipation. Lawyers in tailored suits murmured to each other, already strategizing their next moves. Even the congressional aides, so often bored and distracted, sat ramrod straight, their eyes locked on the polished mahogany witness table at the center of the room. The air was sharp, every breath tinged with anxiety and curiosity. At that table sat Eric Trump, exuding confidence in his expensive suit, flanked by his legal team. Across from him, Representative Jasmine Crockett quietly organized her documents, her expression unreadable. Between them, a single manila envelope waited silent, heavy, and full of secrets. It was only 9:07 a.m., but you could feel it. This would not be just another hearing. Today, the world was about to watch a powerful family face the truth. Eric Trump sat at the center of it all, the living symbol of his family's legacy. Cameras flashed, catching the practiced smile on his face, a smile perfected over years of public appearances, magazine covers, and campaign rallies. His suit was tailored, every strand of blonde hair in place, his posture radiating certainty. From the outside, he looked like a man untouched by fear or doubt. His father's shadow loomed large, not just in the stories told by the media, but in the expectation that Eric would uphold the Trump brand power, confidence, and victory at any cost. Around him, his legal team formed a fortress, a visible wall of expertise and influence. Every nod, every quiet exchange was calculated to project control. Yet for all the outward confidence, there were tiny tells, a tap of his finger on the table, a glance that lingered too long at the manila envelope, a shallow breath he hoped no one would notice. He knew how to perform for the cameras, but this morning felt different. The room, the questions, the eyes, everything pressed in on him. To the world, Eric Trump was the unshakable heir to a dynasty. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. While all eyes were on Eric Trump, Jasmine Crockett moved with quiet purpose. She didn't grandstand or draw attention to herself. Instead, she methodically arranged her stacks of documents, white for background yellow for supporting evidence, and the infamous red file for what she called the truth nobody wants to face. But at the center of her desk, unmoving, was the manila envelope. It was ordinary in appearance, but somehow felt dangerous, like a fuse waiting to be lit. Jasmine glanced at it only once, her expression unreadable, as if she alone understood the weight of what it contained. For years, Jasmine had learned that true power didn't come from shouting the loudest, but from knowing more than anyone else in the room. Every paperclip, every highlight, every page was placed with intention. She was a master of preparation, and her calm demeanor made the tension even thicker. To the untrained eye, Jasmine was just another committee member. But to those who paid attention, it was clear she was ready for battle. And the real threat in room 2154 was not loud, but silent. The envelope closed heavy. Silence seemed to whisper that something irreversible was about to begin. Everything in that room was at risk, far more than money, but money was at the heart of it. $800 million. Enough to change not just lives, but the fate of a family for generations. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a fight for the very soul of the Trump dynasty. For Eric, every word he spoke carried the weight of his family's reputation, a legacy built over decades now trembling on the edge of exposure. A single mistake, one wrong answer, and the golden fade could crack for all the world to see. But the stakes went even deeper. At the center of this storm was Barron Trump, still just a teenager. His future, his place in the family, his very sense of belonging all hung in the balance. In a matter of minutes, his world could be reshaped forever by decisions made in a room full of strangers, lawyers, and cameras. It wasn't just about inheritance. It was about identity, justice, and the painful question every family faces: who is truly worthy and who is left behind? To the outside world, the Trump family is a polished brand. Gold towers, private jets, tailored suits, and the image of unstoppable success. They've built a reputation not just on wealth, but on a narrative that they are the embodiment of American grit, family unity, and generational triumph. But every brand has a backstage, and behind the curtain, the truth is rarely so clean. Behind the cameras, the speeches, and the carefully curated magazine covers, lie fractured relationships, legal maneuvers, and whispered tensions that the public never sees. The image of loyalty is powerful, but it only takes one document, one question, one leak to reveal how fragile that image truly is. Donald Trump built an empire on the power of appearance, and for years his children learned to perform, to smile for the press, to echo the message, to uphold the myth. Eric in particular played his role well, the loyal son, the steady voice, the heir who never wavered. But myths are not built to last forever. They are crafted, maintained, and eventually tested. And today that test has a name: Jasmine Crockett. Long before she stepped into room 2154, Jasmine Crockett had been fighting battles the cameras never saw. She cut her teeth in Dallas courtrooms, places with peeling paint, overworked judges, and clients who couldn't afford a decent suit, let alone a dream team of lawyers. Their justice wasn't served on silver platters. It had to be chased, clawed for, built from late nights, broken families, and lives forgotten by the system. She fought for teenage boys labeled dangerous because of their skin. She stood beside single mothers evicted for missing rent by 3 days. She cross-examined police officers with shaky reports, exposed landlords who preyed on the poor, and faced judges who barely looked up when reading verdicts. For Jasmine, the law was never about status. It was about balance, restoring what power had tilted. She knew what it was like to walk into a courtroom outnumbered, underestimated, and under-resourced, and still walk out having told the truth. So when she looked at Eric Trump surrounded by privilege, draped in silence, and guarded by lawyers, she didn't see someone intimidating. She saw someone who had never been told no. And that to her was dangerous, because she hadn't just come to question his narrative. She came to defend every kid who'd been told they didn't belong in the will. At first glance, Eric still looked composed, shoulder-square voice, steady jaw set like stone. But for those watching closely, the mask had begun to slip. He tapped his index finger against the polished wood table. Not fast, not loud, but rhythmically, like a man unconsciously counting down to something he couldn't stop. His eyes, once locked on the room like a performer owning the stage, began to shift to the envelope, to his attorneys, to the gallery. He blinked more than usual. His suit still fit like armor, but something underneath was fraying. Across the room, Jasmine never raised her voice. She didn't rush, didn't smirk. Her eyes, steady and unblinking, tracked Eric like a hawk. Her hands remained calm, gliding across pages as if rehearsed 1,000 times. Every motion she made was deliberate, surgical. She had him marked. Eric, the man who had spent his life behind glass towers and legal walls, was no longer protected. In this room, under these lights, it wasn't money or power that mattered, it was clarity, and Jasmine had it in abundance. The public saw a confident Trump heir, but the room felt something else entirely, the quiet unraveling of a man who realized too late that someone had come prepared not to argue with him, but to expose him. You could feel it in the walls, the kind of silence that doesn't come from quiet, but from collective breath-holding. The gallery was packed. Seasoned reporters, many of whom had covered presidencies and political implosions for decades, weren't typing. Their fingers hovered above keyboards, frozen. What was happening wasn't ordinary testimony. It was history unfolding one word at a time. Lawyers seated behind Eric whispered just under their breath. They leaned into one another, papers shuffled too quickly to look calm. Their body language betrayed them. These weren't routine legal notes, they were red alerts. Some congressional staffers gripped pens without writing, just to have something to hold on to. Even the C-SPAN camera operators, usually invisible behind their lenses, adjusted their focus with trembling fingers. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It had turned into theater, real, raw, and irreversible. And Jasmine hadn't even opened the envelope yet. Every eye in the room darted between Eric's cracking composure and Jasmine's controlled silence. What hadn't been said yet felt louder than anything spoken. The tension wasn't just in the room, it was in the air. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She adjusted her glasses, lifted one sheet of yellow paper from the stack, and looked directly at Eric Trump, not with hostility, but with precision. Her voice was steady, neutral, almost too calm. "Mr. Trump," she began, "you've described your family's decision-making as merit-based and grounded in traditional American values. Could you clarify how those decisions are legally documented and what specific criteria are used to define merit when it comes to inheritance in family business leadership?" That was it. No accusations, no fire, no drama. But the silence that followed hit harder than any gavel. Eric blinked, once, then twice. His hands shifted slightly on the table, the fingers that had been drumming earlier now clenched together. It was a simple question on the surface, but it had teeth. Because to answer honestly, Eric would have to explain exactly who decides what merit means in the Trump family and why someone like Barron might be excluded. And to deflect meant Jasmine had something ready, something that could hurt. It was a trap disguised as a handshake, and everyone in the room knew it. Eric took a breath, then another. He leaned forward slightly the way he'd been coached to during mock interviews and campaign prep. His smile returned polished, professional, forced. He began speaking not to Jasmine, but to the cameras. "Well, Congresswoman," he said, voice smooth, "my family has always believed in rewarding hard work, loyalty, and responsibility. These values are at the core of our business. We don't make decisions based on favoritism. We believe in results, commitment, and long-term vision. Of course, legal teams handle the technical documents, but the spirit of our choices has always reflected the American dream." It sounded good, patriotic, scripted, but something was off. The words were too clean, too practiced, like a politician delivering talking points instead of a man defending his family's integrity. He never once answered the actual question. He didn't explain what merit meant. He didn't explain how it was measured. He didn't explain why certain family members were left out. Jasmine didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. The pause that followed spoke volumes. Reporters raised eyebrows. Legal staff scribbled notes faster. Even the gallery shifted in their seats. No one in the room was buying it. Eric had stuck to the script, but the audience could already tell. This wasn't a performance he was going to control. The silence after Eric's answer was longer than it should have been. Not because people didn't hear him, but because they didn't believe him. You could feel the shift in the room. The temperature hadn't changed, but the pressure had. Reporters weren't just observing anymore, they were leaning forward. Phones were lifted, screens lit, fingers hovered. The gallery sensed it, the performance was slipping. And Jasmine, she didn't say a word. She just watched. Calm, patient, waiting like someone who knew exactly what would happen next. Eric tried to recover. He straightened his tie, cleared his throat, and added, "I think it's important to respect family privacy in these matters. These aren't decisions made lightly. They come from decades of experience and deep conversations rooted in values." It was the kind of sentence that sounded reasonable until you realized it still didn't answer the question. His hands moved more now. A flicker of discomfort passed through his eyes. His voice, still smooth now, carried a strain he couldn't hide. The mask hadn't fallen off yet, but it was cracking, and the entire room was watching it happen. The shift wasn't loud. It was quiet, strategic, like the first breeze before a storm. Eric's attorneys leaned in suddenly, whispering behind cupped hands. One passed a folded note across the table. Another flipped rapidly through a binder with trembling fingers. Pages rustled like warning signs. Their polished armor, $2,000 suits rehearsed confidence was showing cracks. They weren't in control anymore. The rhythm of the room had changed. What started as Eric's show was no longer his. The audience knew it. You could feel it in their posture, leaning in lips, slightly parted eyes narrowing with anticipation. Something was coming. They didn't know what, but they knew who would bring it. Jasmine hadn't moved. She didn't need to. Power had shifted, and she now held the gravity of the moment. She wasn't speaking, she was commanding. And the envelope, still untouched, still closed, suddenly felt like a loaded weapon resting on the table. For the first time, Eric Trump blinked. Not the casual blink of a bored witness. This was different. This was the blink of a man searching for the edge of a cliff he didn't know he was standing on. Jasmine's question was short, precise, lethal. "Can you tell the committee who authorized the transfer?" Just 8 words. But it sucked the air from the room. Eric's mouth opened, then closed. He looked to his left, his lawyer avoided eye contact. He looked to his right, nothing but papers and cold water. The confidence gone, the charm fading. He cleared his throat, once, twice, then silence. In that stillness, the mask fell. What remained was not a power player, but a man cornered. And the audience knew this wasn't just about one transfer. This was about truth, about legacy, about someone who thought he'd never have to explain himself, finally forced to answer. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. Jasmine Crockett didn't need to. Her weapon was silence followed by precision. As Eric fumbled for an answer, Jasmine slowly leaned forward, resting her hand on the envelope, now lying open on the table. "Mr. Trump," she said, voice low but steady. "This signature is yours, correct?" He froze, and just like that, the dominoes began to fall. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cut him off. She let him squirm because justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits, patient, sharp, unrelenting. Each document pulled from the envelope told a story. A trail of papers soaked in arrogance and carelessness. Wire transfers, internal emails, handwritten notes. Eric's eyes followed each page like a man reading his own obituary. Jasmine didn't grandstand. She gave the floor to the evidence, and the truth did the heavy lifting. By the time she finished, the room wasn't filled with applause, it was filled with something far more powerful: respect and fear. Because Jasmine hadn't just exposed a transaction. She had revealed a truth no dynasty ever wants the world to see them. That behind the polished portraits and powerful names, some empires rot quietly from within. Within 4 minutes of the hearing ending, Eric Trump Exposed was trending in 5 countries. Clips of Jasmine's quiet takedown flooded every platform: Facebook, X, YouTube, TikTok. News outlets scrambled to grab sound bites. Late-night hosts dropped their opening monologues. And the American public, they were furious and divided. Some saw a woman of integrity standing up to entitlement. Others saw an attack on tradition, on family. But one thing united them all. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a reckoning. Talk shows asked, can wealth buy silence forever? Is legacy just a mask for unchecked power? Would your own mother choose truth over blood? Family groups argued in kitchens. Old friends unfollowed each other online. Millions watched the clip on loop, mesmerized not just by what was said, but by what it meant. The Trump name had long been a fortress, but now it felt like a crumbling statue chipped by years of arrogance and finally cracked open by one woman in a manila envelope. This wasn't just a political earthquake. It was a cultural aftershock. As the media storm escalated, a quieter story began surfacing, one that didn't involve billion-dollar legacies, courtroom theatrics, or headline drama. It was about a 19-year-old kid, Barron Trump. While the world debated Eric's downfall and Jasmine's courage, Barron sat at the center of it all, silent, exposed, and used. The image of him sitting behind his father that day, face half in shadow, hands clenched in his lap, became iconic. The headlines didn't ask, how is Barron doing? They asked, what will this do to the Trump name? But online, the conversation shifted. TikTok teens' trauma, informed therapists, and even veterans began speaking out. This isn't just a political moment, it's a human one. Why are we ignoring the kid in the crossfire? Legacy shouldn't come at the cost of a child's peace. For once, Barron wasn't a meme. He was a mirror reflecting back the ugly truth of families that bury pain under power, that use sons as symbols, not souls. He didn't choose this courtroom. He didn't sign away trust for strategy. He didn't weaponize legacy. He was just a son. And somehow, in the wreckage of public shame and private betrayal, he became the most human part of this entire story. As Barron's story captured national attention, a ripple effect began. Across America, people started sharing their own stories not about fame or fortune, but about familial betrayal and the invisible wounds it leaves behind. Vignette with the forgotten daughter in Idaho. Marcia, 61, wrote on Facebook, when my father died, I found out my brother got the house and I got a watch that didn't even work. He said I didn't need more because I was already married well. That day I realized being the quiet one meant being invisible. Vignette, the Golden Son in Texas. Leo, a retired veteran, shared my mom co-signed a loan for my younger brother after he got arrested. When I needed help with cancer bills, she told me to man up. Favoritism doesn't always sound like love. Sometimes it sounds like silence. Vignette 3. The mother who was left behind, Carmen. 7 years, emailed a local news show. My son married into money. They told me I wasn't presentable enough to attend their wedding. So I watched the live stream from my 1-bedroom apartment. Sometimes betrayal wears a tuxedo. These weren't political families. These were people like your neighbors, your relatives, you, and their stories poured in, thousands of them, fueled by one televised courtroom where power and pain collided. Because behind every story of Barron is someone who was once left behind, silenced, or sacrificed for image. Barron wasn't just a name trending on social media. He became a symbol, a mirror for thousands of children who grew up watching love get measured in gifts, in attention, in inheritance, in silence. Experts weighed in. Child psychologists spoke up. When a child is excluded emotionally or financially, even subtly, it wires their brain differently. It tells them they're not worthy, not loved, and that belief becomes a legacy. The pain of exclusion doesn't end when the child grows up. It echoes into the way they parent, the way they trust, the way they see themselves. Take Alex, 43, who still remembers Christmas at age 12. My sister got a keyboard. I got socks. My mom said, because she practices piano and you don't do anything. I've been chasing approval ever since. Or Maya, 31, when my brother got arrested, my parents emptied their savings for his bail. When I needed a loan to start my business, they said that's not what family money is for. I never asked again. Barron may be a Trump, but every viewer saw someone they knew in his eyes. A child dismissed, a son overshadowed, a human being forced to swallow hurt for someone else's legacy. And perhaps the most brutal part, that pain doesn't end with the child, it gets passed down, until someone says enough. This wasn't just about Barron Trump anymore. It became a mirror, a brutal one, for everything America refuses to confront: race, privilege, power, legacy, double standards. Jasmine didn't need to shout. Her silence was the thunder. When Eric stumbled, America watched with bated breath. Not because it was a courtroom drama, but because it echoed every moment Black and brown Americans had been punished for being too loud, too smart, too bold. And here stood Jasmine Crockett, poised, brilliant, unbending. Meanwhile, Eric the Heir, the insider, sweated under soft questions. How come she intimidating for asking questions? But he's passionate when he raises his voice, a viral tweet read. The internet lit up. Threads, podcasts, reaction videos. Everyone had something to say because it wasn't just about a scandal. It was about who gets to fail with dignity and who never got the chance. Privilege wasn't just wealth. It was invisibility when convenient and spotlights when praised. It was connections without consequences. It was a justice system that blinked slowly at some and struck swiftly at others. And in the middle of it all, a Black congresswoman, unapologetic, unshaken, reminding the country of a truth it keeps trying to bury: power in America isn't about who's right. It's about who gets to speak, who gets to be heard, and who gets protected when it all burns down. What would you do if the person hurting your child was also someone you once loved? If justice meant tearing down the walls of your own family's image, would you pull the thread? Would you expose the truth even if it meant destroying someone who shares your blood? That's the question Jasmine Crockett forced America to ask. Not just through the facts, but through the way she looked at Barron Trump. He wasn't her son. He wasn't even her constituent. But in that moment, he was every child who's ever been caught in a war between silence and truth. Eric Trump sat there surrounded by power, but utterly alone when the lies began to fall apart. And Jasmine, she didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. She asked the question that stopped the room cold. At what point does protecting your name stop being love and start becoming cruelty? That's the dilemma. Do you stay loyal to blood or loyal to truth? Do you forgive a lie because it came from your father? Do you look away because it's your sister who stole the inheritance? These aren't courtroom questions. They're human ones, and they linger long after the cameras are turned off. The door closed, but the damage echoed. Eric Trump left the hearing room like a man trying to outrun a storm. But the storm had already taken root in headlines and hashtags in the court of public opinion. His confident persona shattered. His allies now whispering. The Trump name once again dragged into a moral war it couldn't control. Back at Mar-a-Lago, there was no rally, no red carpet, just silence and questions. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, didn't gloat. She walked out the same way she walked in, calm, grounded, a woman who knew she hadn't just won a legal battle. Shed ignited a conversation that couldn't be ignored. Reporters begged for quotes, pundits screamed opinions. But Jasmine, she went back to work, because for her it was never about headlines. And Barron, he didn't speak. He didn't need to. But something shifted. He stopped showing up to family photo ops. He unfollowed certain accounts. He asked new questions at school. Not out loud, but in the way teenagers do, quietly, rebelliously searching for truth, even when it means confronting the people you love most. That's the cost of truth. Not everyone claps. Not every wound heals clean. But some stories have to be lived before they're believed. And this one was just beginning. Not all legacies are made of money. Some are made of choices. Eric Trump might have walked in with $1 billion name, But he walked out stripped down to something far more revealing his character. The hearing didn't just put a price tag on power, it exposed the fragile seams beneath it. What did we really witness? Not just a courtroom showdown, not just Jasmine's precision or Eric's unraveling, but a moment when a nation paused and asked itself, is a legacy about wealth, or is it about the truth you're willing to stand for? Even when it costs you everything, Jasmine Crockett reminded America of something it often forgets. That real strength isn't in silencing others. It's in listening when it's hardest. That true worth isn't in what you inherit, but in what you build, protect, and defend. And Barron, he became a mirror for us all. A reminder that the next generation is watching not what we say, but what we do when the lights go out and no one's clapping. This wasn't just about Trump. It was about every family that's ever buried the truth in the name of image. Every child who grew up wondering if they mattered less than a sibling. Every person who's had to fight to be heard at the dinner table in courtrooms or behind closed doors. This story won't be remembered for the money lost. It'll be remembered for the courage it sparked, because in the end, character isn't inherited, it's earned. One hard truth at a time. So now it's your turn. You've watched this story unfold from whispered threats and courtroom tension to a dynasty shaken and a teenager silently caught in the crossfire. But the truth is, this story isn't just about them, it's about us. What do we value most? What do we leave behind when our titles fade and our money means nothing? Will our legacy be one of silence or of courage, of comfort or of justice, of pretending everything's fine or standing up when no one else will? Eric had wealth, but Jasmine had truth. One tried to protect an image. The other, she protected a future. And Barron, he reminded us what's really at stake, a child's sense of worth. A legacy shaped not by inheritance but by example. So we ask you not as an audience, but as a human being. When your name is spoken years from now, will it echo with fear or with honor? When your children or their children ask who you were, will they say you chose comfort or character? You don't need a courtroom. You don't need a billion-dollar name. Every day you write your legacy in the way you speak, in who you protect, in whether you show up when the moment asks you to. So let this story be more than just content. Let it be your mirror. Because in the end, the most powerful legacy is one you leave behind, not in dollars, but in dignity. And that is something no one can take from you. The room is still, not silent still, like the air before a storm, like history holding its breath. Eric Trump sits, eyes glazed, jaw clenched. All the wealth in the world couldn't buy him peace right now. Jasmine stands, no gloating, no smile, just truth. She places the manila envelope, once feared, once heavy, on the table. It's empty. That's the point. It was never about what was inside. It was about what wasn't. The silence, the denial, the decades of avoiding accountability. She speaks softly, but each word like thunder. You were never afraid of what it'd reveal. You were afraid it'd make you look in the mirror. Gasps. A few flashes from reporters' phones. Barron turns his head, eyes wet, but stronger somehow. He sees her, really sees her. And for the first time, someone fought for him. Jasmine picks up her coat, walks past the press, past the cameras, past the whispers. As she exits, a single reporter calls out, "Congresswoman, was it worth it?" She pauses, turns, and with the weight of 1,000 untold stories behind her eyes, she simply says, "Ask him in 20 years, fade to black." Sometimes justice isn't about what's proven in court. It's about who finally dares to speak. This story reminds us that power without accountability is a dangerous illusion, and silence, especially in families, can cause wounds that last for generations. Eric's empire was built on image, but Jasmine, she stood for truth even when the cost was high. In Barron, he taught us that sometimes the loudest cry is the one that never leaves your lips. So ask yourself, are you protecting peace, or are you just avoiding the truth? Because in the end, legacies aren't measured in millions. They're measured in courage and conscience, and in who dares to break the cycle. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on your own family, your silence, your truth, don't just scroll. Do something. Tap subscribe, turn on the bell, and join us as we expose the stories others are too afraid to tell. Because at Mr. Exposed Stories, we don't chase views, we chase justice.